Hello and welcome to Big Picture. I am Vishal Dahiya, and today we will look at the angle of extremist threat in peaceful protests. Now, Uttar Pradesh State government has written to the Union Home Ministry seeking a ban on Popular Front of India, that is PFI. This was done after almost 24 members of PFI were arrested from various parts of the state by UP police for their alleged involvement in violence during the protest against the Citizenship Amendment Act. This includes the state head of the PFI as well. Now, the state police says it has impounded objectionable material from the arrested persons, and a detailed report has also been sent to the Home Ministry for further action. So to understand this particular topic more clearly and analyze it further, we have a distinguished panel of guests today with us. Let me first introduce the guests to you, beginning with Mr. R.B.S. Mani, former Under Secretary, Home Ministry. We also have with us Mr. Jayadeva Ranade, former Additional Secretary, Cabinet Secretariat, and we are also joined by Mr. Prakash Singh, former DGP of the Uttar Pradesh Police. Welcome all of you to Rajya Sabha TV studios. Let me begin with you, Mr. Ranade, and let's look at this particular aspect, This particular organization, that's the PFI, is under scrutiny right now, and it's not the first time that PFI is under scrutiny. There have been past incidents as well, wherein this organization has come under the radar of the law enforcement agencies.
Absolutely correct. In fact, their history, if I may call it that, stretches for more than 10 years, where they have been found, or in fact, even the Kerala High Court has described it as an Islamic extremist organization, where there have been statements made that they're an offspring of Singh, or links with other terrorist organizations, Islamic terrorist organizations. There have been raids on their branch offices, which has yielded a lot of weapons, rifles, etc. So I would say that the extremist militant link of this organization has been established. It is well known. Now the question comes whether they were involved in the rioting and the problems that took place in UP. That, of course, it is the UP police who will have the data. But presumably, when they have written to the Ministry of Home Affairs, they would have sent a dossier with it, which would list all this
documented evidence.
And the Home Ministry has its own sources for vetting it. So I think that on the surface, I would say that certainly the organization merits a very close look, and the state as well as the center need to examine the activities of this organization, sources of funding, etc., and then take action, because we cannot have such organizations functioning in India with another agenda.
Okay. Mr. Mani, how would you look at, this aspect of the threat of organizations with extremist agenda on issues which involve maybe peaceful protests, or maybe, something which these organizations would try and hijack to, further their own agenda, which in turn is becoming evident, or rather becomes evident at a later stage, that it turns up to be an extremist one?
Let me put it this way. In Kashmir, this has been happening. The protesters, the stone pelters, whomsoever you call them, or peaceful protesters, or Buranwanis and all, they have had their linkages. See, it was all engineered on the back of the back-end engineering was always done by the extremist organization. The people on the foot soldiers were only appearing to be peaceful protesters, or even not so peaceful protesters, but it's a fact that they have been. In Kashmir, the trend had started. In left-wing extremist states also, this is a very common feature. We had, in fact, I have written a detailed account of this, even including the Binayak Sains and others who were from the back end supporting the left-wing extremists in their respective states. Now, against the CAA, if UP government has seized certain documents or other unwanted material, undesirable material, prohibited material, arms, etc., etc.
Okay.
Certainly, it calls for a very serious decision on the part of the government, and including banning the PFI, because PFI has been doing all these unholy activities, anti-national activities for days unknown, right from around more than a decade. That is number one. More importantly, PFI it has been, many of these organizations, not just PFI, many of these organizations have had human rights lobbies backing them up.
Okay.
Whether it is in Kashmir, human rights and certain section of media also backing them up, standing with them. And whenever there is such a unholy thing, and whenever a serious action is thought about, they have always stood by them and then supported them, virulent propaganda in the media about violation of human rights, etc., etc.
Okay.
This is one part. My knowledge about this is about the DGP's letter to Home Ministry has been seeking a ban on PFI under UAPA Act. Now, UAPA Act banning under Section 3 is a very, very elaborate procedure. You require a lot of material for that. And subsequently, under Section 4, there is a UAPA tribunal which will go into it, and they will also accord another opportunity. So, I think this is a very just thing that the government is seeking to, the UP government has sent a report. As my previous speaker, Mr. Ranade, said that they have their own channels to cross-verify and corroborate the evidences, and subsequently, if found needed, if found necessary, they should and they will ban the PFI, they will bring them under the UAPA. Even after the ban, the confirmation of ban is again a 3 months procedure where a judicial tribunal works on it. And
okay, so there is an elaborate process involved out there, wherein all aspects will be looked into, including the documented evidence. And we bring in Mr. Singh here, Mr. Prakash Singh, the former DGP of Uttar Pradesh. Mr. Singh, you have led the police force of the state, which has now made a recommendation to the Home Ministry with all the documented evidence against the Popular Front of India, saying that this particular organization should be banned because of its involvement in the violence which was caused during those protests. So, one, this particular case and this particular organization, and two, this whole scenario of the extremist agenda, taking over a particular protest or a particular issue which is being talked about in the public domain.
You see, the Popular Front of India, it has a long history, a 13-year-old history of involvement in extremist, fundamentalist, militant activities. And as was pointed out by Mr. Ranade, the High Court has also taken adverse notice of this organization's activities. There have been raids on the offices and establishments of this party in Kerala at different periods of time. In 2010 there were raids at different places, 2013 also there were raids, and in these raids the state police found very incriminating material. There were bombs, there were explosives, there were foreign currency, there was subversive propaganda, all those things were there. And so this organization has come to adverse notice, and although it started from Kerala, it has today branches in Jharkhand. In fact, Jharkhand state had to ban this organization because it came to very serious adverse notice of the state government. Then it has units, as I said, in Andhra Pradesh, UP, Assam, Telangana. I mean, it has spread far and wide in different parts of the country, and its activities, it appears, have not engaged the kind of serious attention which they should have of the government of India. Although we have an IB and a very good IB network, and I'm sure a lot of material, much more than what UP Police has submitted, should be available to the Home Ministry through the Intelligence Bureau.
Okay.
Now, when the UP Police have submitted a report, I take it for granted that they have enough documentary and other evidence to support the case for a ban. And I think, people describe the PFI by all kinds of descriptions. I call it the Indian version of the Islamic State. Mind you, I'm not saying an Indian branch of the Islamic State, I'm saying an Indian version of the Islamic State. Today it pretends to be campaigning for human rights and social movement among the Muslims, but its agenda is definitely subversive and militant. It has been trying to forge a unity of Dalits, Muslims, Sikhs, all on a common platform against what they call Brahmanical dominance of the Indian politics. And the subversive literature which has been found in their possession shows their sympathy for different terrorist organizations which we are aware of.
Okay.
So I think the sooner we take effective action against this organization at the all India level, at the state level action has been taken in, to some extent in Kerala, to some extent in Jharkhand, but on an all India level I think it's high time that the Government of India takes cognizance of the dangerous possibilities of this organization growing into a very serious criminal threat. In fact, the National General Secretary of the organization, his name is Muhammad Ali Jinnah. What more do you want to know about this organization? Here is a man who claims to be another incarnation of Jinnah. I mean, not in that sense of the term, but definitely another Jinnah by name. And he is the National General Secretary of the party. It's a subversive organization. It's fundamentalist. It is militant, and it's high time that the government comes down with a heavy hand on this organization.
Okay, Mr. Singh, one more question here is that this is not the first time that we talking about how fundamentalist organizations like these or the organizations which have extremist agenda do try to hijack issues which are there in public domain. But from a law enforcement agency's perspective, that is starting with the state police, how do these issues like this, the aspects of organizations like these, fundamentalist organizations like these, should be tackled, starting from the word go?
You see, the law enforcement agency will work within the framework of law. On date, they are not banned. So they will only take notice of their violent activities. Now, if they have been found involved in, as you yourself said, whenever they find a particular agitation, they try to hijack it and try to take leadership of that. If not leadership, at least play a prominent part in that agitation. And in this agitation, the current ongoing agitation against the NCR, they have taken a very prominent part in UP, definitely, and maybe from the background in other states like Assam also.
Okay.
Now, within the existing framework of law, then the law enforcement agencies have to book them for their specific acts of violence or other activities which amount to an infringement of the penal code. So under appropriate sections they have to be booked and action has to be taken against that. But as this kind of evidence multiplies, that there were at least say 20, 30, 40 cases against members of the PFI engaged in acts subversive and violent activities against the government, then I mean that once you have that evidence, then you can move the government for taking more comprehensive action at the national level, banning it under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act.
Okay, so this is how it goes. But Mr. Ranade, as if you look at this particular aspect of how the organizations which have an extremist agenda or a fundamentalist point of view on issues which are there in public domain, or maybe try and put their own version of the things. This is a particular threat which India has been fighting for quite some time now, and these organizations prop up in different forms with different names altogether. So as a whole, if you look at this particular aspect, the extremist threat, how should we deal with it?
I think the task of the agencies and the police and the government as a whole becomes difficult when you're functioning in a democratic society and in a democratic environment where people have the right to articulate their views, to protest, etc. Organizations like this one, they also take cover under human rights organizations, other NGOs. They try and make common cause with them to further their agenda, which the human rights and other organizations may or may not be fully aware of. And it was interesting when Mr. Prakash Singh was mentioning the various states where they are active. A number of them are Naxal infested or have been Naxal infested. So it brings out to my mind that there is the PFI is trying to forge a linkage between these various diverse groups, all of them with some issue or a complaint.
Cross-linked platform.
Exactly, against the government of the day. So this is one agenda. The second, I would say that where the government is hampered is in controlling the funding of organizations like this. because they have a number of so-called charitable causes to which people contribute, which actually feeds into their treasury. Similarly, the PFI as an entity must be having its own account. And then, as again was pointed out, the limitations of the law necessitate that specific persons be booked for specific acts. So the organization itself could get away scot-free. So I think these are the difficulties that we have. And as part of the extremist backdrop, I think it becomes more pertinent that we start looking at all these organizations as a government, not necessarily when they do something, but just to watch them, monitor them, and see that their activities are not such as are going to endanger either the people or the law of the land.
Okay. Mr. Mani, your views on that aspect?
Rightly so, but you were, as it's been very clearly said, that the data collection on this, based on the trends of charges, etc., the people repeatedly getting involved in propagating anti-national radicalized agenda, separatist agenda, all these things, the tracking units of the state police, every state police has an intelligence unit, plus our own IB, plus the IB's different states have station directors. They are all already working on it, but as Mr. Prakash Singh pointed out, see, we cannot go into a sort of a preventive thing. You have to be you can't be proactive on this unless and until just to plan a crime or to do anything or keeping a propaganda per se, it is a law, it is a violation of law under UAPA latest act and all. That's what. And number two is, earlier also the UAPA act suffered from a small vice which has been corrected last year, that it defined a terrorist organization but did not define individual terrorists, which has been corrected last year. This is also one aspect which was hampering arrest of these people who are involved in terrorist activities and all.
Okay.
So this was, see, organization could be banned as a terrorist or declared as a terrorist organization, brought into the schedule of UAPA, but to arrest them. So for example, Duktarane Millet is a terrorist organization, that the lady who was leading it was roaming around scot-free. This is one of the
that is why, several members of the SIMI are said to be part of organizations like these.
New organization.
Okay.
That has been recently corrected, no doubt it is indeed, but SIMI also, the SIMI has been under ban, excepting for a short period when in 2009, when UAPA tribunal set aside the banning of it during Justice Geeta Mittal was the tribunal chief, and that happened during the tenure of Mr. P. Chidambaram as a minister. But apart from that, generally the government is able to procure adequate material for banning organization.
Okay.
But the transfer of from shifting of loyalties from one organization to another, the money is transferred, most of the funding is coming through Hawala routes from many of the countries, not including the cryptocurrency route. Earlier fake currency was also one of the major ways, and several other ways. Those they were not coming through the formal channels. And Zakat was one foundation. Zakat Foundation itself is an organization. Even IRF had been found to be funding all these things. But the question is, how transfer from shifting loyalties from one organization to other organization was easy earlier, but now it has also become difficult. This, I think, the first case of a ban which has come after the amendment to the UAPA Act, defining a terrorist as an individual.
Should be this one. Which the request has been made, and let's see how the Home Ministry goes ahead and goes about on this aspect. But let me bring Mr. Singh back here. Mr. Singh, on the funding aspect, as Mr. Ranade was pointing out, and also the very fact that the organizations sometimes are dealt with effectively, but then when it comes to the individuals which are involved with the organizations, it was difficult earlier. But with the change made in the UAPA Act, that also have been taken care of. But the funding aspect also, that needs to be kept track of. We need to ensure the law enforcement agencies specifically that the financing of organizations like these is something which is kept under watch.
I think that's a very important aspect, and unfortunately, I'm sorry to say that there are many things that the Intelligence Bureau was aware of, that I as a senior police officer knew about. But at the government level, there was a very ethical response to even when there were definite sources of information. I mean, I'll take one aspect about the funding of organizations which were engaged in proselytization, Christian proselytization within the country. I mean, there are a whole lot of organizations engaged in that kind of activity. And if you look at if you dig out the old annual reports of the Ministry of Home Affairs, the largest amount of funds, FCR funds, which came from abroad, were all coming to these Christian mission organizations. Everybody knew it. I knew I had once occasion to go to the FCR division of the MHA, and when I mean, apart from attending to my own work, when I talked to them about this, I mean, because I was concerned about it as an internal security, I mean, someone who has dealt with internal security.
Okay.
But the officer gave me a very wishy-washy reply. I mean, obviously, from the UPA government was very soft in this matter. Similarly, in regard to criminal cases, I mean, everyone knew that Yasin Malik is wanted for the murder of 4 IAF personnel. I brought this. I mean, on several occasions, I mooted this to top men sitting in the Home Ministry. But I never got any satisfactory response. Ultimately, this government had the political courage to book him, to resurrect that case and book him on charges of murder, Yasin Malik.
Okay.
So it is not that we don't have information about funding. It's not that we don't have information about involvement in crime of people who are otherwise masquerading as important political leaders in Kashmir or in the Northeast. We know we have tons of information. The point is, government should have the political will and the courage to take unpleasant decisions irrespective of the repercussions.
Okay.
So it has started happening now. Even now, I think there are so many grey areas which need to be covered. In Assam, I'm as a former DGP of the state, I can say there are a whole lot of organizations which are engaged in fundamentalist activities. But so far, I am not aware of any action being taken against them. I suppose, I mean, we take action only when, as they say, सिर से ऊपर पानी चला जाता है, तब हम action लेते हैं. Otherwise, we allow things to drift.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's high time that at the national level, the IB should be able to feed correct information. They have all the information to the Home Ministry, and I think now we have a Home Minister. The man is a go-getter. He has the capacity to take decisions. So we should be able to, I mean, on an all India scale, we should be able to take action against organizations which are fundamentalist in nature, which are militant in nature, and which are engaged in subversive activities.
Okay, okay. Mr. Ranade and Mr. Mani, quick concluding comments from you on the aspect that, as all of you are saying, and Mr. Singh clearly pointed out, that the laws are there and the information is there. What is required here is for all those involved to have that will and courage to go ahead and act upon them and act timely.
You couldn't be more right. I mean, I think we have to have the political will, as Mr. Prakash said, to act on the information that is available. We also have to have civil servants who actually put up the facts of the case wherever a decision is required, rather than duck it, on grounds of sensitivity. So I think it's a combination of factors, but certainly we need to move on this. In the larger interest, I would say, because it's not something that is happening only today, it's something that can weaken the fabric of our democracy in time to come.
Okay, Mr. Mani.
On FCRA Act also, there is a lot of very disturbing data. From 2001 to 17, around 1 lakh crores came into India. 60%, more than 60% to Christian organization, around 26 to 28% to Islamic organizations, rest to certain organizations which were involved in frivolous public interest litigations and human rights group which are partnering with these organizations. These are all matters of record.
Okay.
This is also very disturbing. I personally stand for banning the FCRA when you don't require a foreign contribution in a natural disaster like Kerala when we refused. Where is the need for solving our own problem? Why do you require a FCRA? This is my take on that.
Okay.
With that, I think it will be put a lot of end to this funding of many of these organizations.
Okay, that's a very interesting aspect, but a different one as well, and we can have a separate discussion on that also. But thank you so much for your views on this particular aspect. As our panelists have pointed out clearly, the several shades or aspects of how or to deal with the extremist threat and what exactly is the extremist threat, how these organizations work, what are law enforcement agencies supposed to do, and how the entire process works. We'll come back again tomorrow with a different topic. Till then, keep watching Rajya Sabha Television.